It's okay. I get it. I've been there. This book is big and dense and intimidating. And maybe you're thinking, do I really have to? And that's totally fine to think. But I'm hoping that this video can be a safe space for you to make that decision. And hopefully I can help, at least a little. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome to Freshly Read Books. So first book review back of Booker, and it's not going to be exactly the same as what I typically do for my single book videos where it's just a review on the book. Instead, I'm taking a bit of a different approach, which I actually have to thank Kamini from Instagram. The account is Posies and Prose, and also apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. I just realized, never heard it out loud, but she unknowingly gave me this idea just because we were talking on Instagram about Books of Jacob since I had just finished the book and she is just starting it. And I was sending her a few things that helped me out, and then I was thinking maybe this would be a good idea to do for my video instead of just a pure review, because I don't know, it feels a little bit weird to review a book that I know so little about, or like the subject I know so little about, but it feels better to maybe approach it from that perspective, saying I have absolutely no experience, no prior knowledge. Like going into this book, I knew nothing of the location, the time period, the people, never heard of Jacob Frank or any of the like self-proclaimed messiahs of the time. Yeah, it was all completely new to me, but I still made it through the book and I still feel like I got a lot out of it. So I want to share maybe the best way to go about reading this book if you're considering it, but you're also scared like I was and still am of the book, even though I've read it already. It's intimidating. It's an intimidating book. So I want to share some thoughts, tips, ideas to possibly help you if you are thinking of taking on this beast. And then at the very end, I'll still do a little bit of a review. But before I actually get into talking about the book, definitely check out the Posies and Prose Instagram account. I'll link it below. It's great. Her book photos are just awesome. So definitely check her out, give her a follow. Plus, she's currently reading the Books of Jacob, which you're clearly already interested in if you're watching this video. So let's start with like a really quick synopsis. I feel like I've explained what this book is about a million times and I've got it like solidified into just one sentence. This book follows Jacob Frank, who was a self-proclaimed messiah. And while Jacob Frank was a real person, this is a novelized version of events. So it follows him, his followers, all throughout the period that he was like known as this messiah. And while it is largely about him, you also get to see a lot of his followers and specifically what they do. You get to see what's going on with religion in this area in general, not just Judaism, but also Catholicism, and also what's going on politically in the area. So there's a lot, clearly, I mean. So let's start with the very basics. I want to talk about format, how you want to approach reading this book, because maybe you don't actually own a copy yet and you're trying to decide how you want to go about this. So we've got two physical editions of the book. We've got the ebook and we've got the audiobook. I want to talk through the pros and cons, I guess, of each of them. So I obviously went with reading the physical copy, which for me worked out well, but also it is heavy, it is cumbersome. So if that's something that you're not a huge fan of, or you want to be taking this around with you, then that's something to consider. But more specifically, I went with the Riverhead edition. This was, I don't think, for any particular reason. However, because of this and the fact that I have people that I've been talking to that read the Fitzcarraldo edition, I can tell you at least the differences between them. So the biggest difference is probably just like in floppiness. So this book is very floppy, which is nice for a big book like this because it will just sit open on your desk, and even being just a few pages in, it already kind of lays like that, whereas the Fitzcarraldo edition is a bit more stiff. I asked for someone who had already completely read the book if it would stay open on its own without the spine being cracked, and no, it wouldn't. But also I heard that the pages are very soft and that wasn't a huge deal breaker or a huge consideration. Like, it wasn't that hard to hold open or anything like that. I think the big pro to the Fitzcarraldo edition is just that it's beautiful and it's a Fitzcarraldo edition, so like it's got a very obvious pro, and it holds up really well over time. So if it's something something that you think that you're going to want to keep and display afterwards, then maybe that's something that's a consideration for you. My copy held up pretty well. I do have a bit of a cracked spine. And besides that, like the cover is a little bit, like you can tell it's been read. That's what I'm saying. So those are really the differences between getting the Riverhead edition and getting the Fitzcarraldo edition, if you want to go down the route of reading a physical copy of the book. Now, of course, there's also the option of reading it as an ebook, which I think is super valid. I think a lot of people decide to read larger books as ebooks just purely because of like the weight and not being able to take it around with you if that's what you want to do. And another huge benefit, besides just being able to carry it around, to doing the ebook is that you can easily look up what different words mean in the book, which I had to do a lot. There was a lot of words that were specific to Jewish culture or to the region that the book was set in that I did not know, or like names of clothing items, things like that that I didn't know that I ended up looking up. I don't think everything I looked up was quite necessary to know what it was in order to understand the story, but sometimes it was just like purely curiosity, and it would have been really nice to just click on like a Kindle or on a tablet to know what the meaning of that thing was. Not to mention, typically on e-readers, you can also look up instances of a specific thing within the book. So if you come across a name and you can't quite remember it, like you know you've heard of them, but you can't quite remember who they are, then you can see previous instances of that name and kind of go back, refresh your memory. That would have been insanely helpful reading this book. So I think that's a huge pro in like the favor of ebooks. One last thing to consider with ebooks is just that there are pictures within this book. So, you know, like my Kindle is I have a very small one. It's like maybe this big, and then there's like also margins and everything like that. So the pictures would have been probably pretty small, which isn't a huge deal. So like that is an example of one of the pictures, but yeah, like, and the pictures don't add a ton to the story or anything. It's not like hugely important that you can really see the picture. It's just something to consider that you wouldn't be able to see quite as well as you would see like in the book. And kind of along the lines of pictures and not being able to have those, we have audiobooks. So that's one of the biggest downsides, I guess, to reading the audiobook, is not getting those pictures at all. However, I do still think that they're not really necessary. Some of them felt like they added to the story. Others felt like, why is this here? I don't know what this is for. And others I really appreciated. Another thing to think about with the audiobook, I know that some people, myself included, sometimes like to do kind of a dual approach to reading a book, where sometimes you listen to the audiobook, sometimes you read it physically. And I would just like to say that I think that could be a challenge with this book, because there are lots of names, specifically if you're not used to names of this region, of like very Polish names. If you're not familiar with the pronunciations of those, then I think it could be difficult to move between the two, because I'll pop up a few of the names that we see within this book that I personally did not know how to pronounce just by reading them. And I know for sure that I was wrong, like with how I was saying it in my head as I was reading. And I think that if I were to try to listen to audiobook, I don't know that I would actually make the connection of like, oh, that's how that's pronounced, instead of being like, that's a different character. So that is something to consider. If you're great with Polish names, it might not matter to you. So once you've made the decision with how you're going to read the book, it seems like you're ready to start reading, except you're not. Stop and watch this video first. I personally found this video about 20 to 30% of my way through the reading. I was Googling something and it led me to this video, and it ended up helping me so much. Like, I cannot express how much this very short video assisted me in my reading experience for the rest of the book. And I think that it's a great one for going into the book, because it really sets the stage with what was going on in the time period before Jacob Frank arrives on the scene. I also have another video in the description that is more about Jacob Frank and his followers specifically, but I would say this is more of like a just in case situation. If you're really confused about what's going on, like the big plot points of the story you're confused about, then maybe you can watch that video to help you out. So more of like a break glass in case of emergency situation. Or if you don't care about like discovering the history of this before going into the book, you could also watch it beforehand. Like that's totally fine. And I'm sure that many people that enter into reading this book already know that history anyways, or at least like the brief points of it that are brought up in this video. So it could be something helpful to watch beforehand as well, but up to you. Now, one of the biggest advantages I had while reading this book was reading it alongside a group of people. I came to it a bit later than this group of people because I was really in denial that I would have to read this. So glad I've read it now, but at the time I was like, I won't read it unless it shows up on the international long list. And then eventually I was like, all right, fine, I'll read it. So I was a little bit later to the game than like the rest of the group that I was reading with. For me, I did this through Kieran's Discord because he's got like a whole section for the books of Jacob. That's where the group read it together. However, this is something that is accessed through his Ko-Fi, so that's something that you would have to do to access that group in particular, which you can do because there are more people that are starting it now that did want to wait until they saw if it was on the international long list or not. So there are people that are just now starting it. Plus there's like all that conversation that happened when people were reading through it the first time. But I think it would be great if you can to just find people in general to talk about this book. If there are people that are reading through it at the same time or that already read through it, you can feel free to use my comment section because I'm assuming that the people that are watching this video are interested in reading this book based off of, you know, the title, thumbnail, whatever of this video. But if all else fails, then feel free to reach out to me either in the comment section or on Instagram to talk about any aspects of the book that you want to talk about. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Once again, though, the only experience I have with this subject is reading this book and the resources that I am telling you about in this video. So I'm probably not the best person, but I am a person that you can talk to. Okay, let's talk characters and names because this book has tons and it's probably one of the scariest parts about it. You may have heard that names are tough in this book and that everybody changes their name, or at least all of Jacob's followers. And by you may have heard of that, I mean that I said it in like my last video, no, 2 videos ago. Also like everybody changes their name, which like not cool, but you probably also heard it from other people. And yes, this is all true. However, I would like to say that when you first find out that all of the names are going to change, it's very scary, but it's not as bad as you would think it's going to be. Tokarczuk does a great job later on of saying either both names or sticking to the name that you're more used to when referring to characters that like you've been reading for the whole book but then change their name. So I kept thinking that like even after that section where it's like everybody's gonna change their name and she was still using both, I kept thinking like, oh, this is her just trying to transition me into their new name and I'll hear more of their new name later. But the whole rest, she really is like helping you out with that. So it's not as scary as it might seem. That's not to take away anything from like, it is still a challenge, but I think it's just as challenging as any other large book that has a ton of characters, you know? Also, if you're one of those people that wants to make a character list, then I do have a few recommendations for the ones that you should pay attention to. So I think that Tokarczuk does a great job of including the character names in the section title for characters that are more prevalent, more important. So if you see a name appearing in a lot of section titles, like in the table of contents, that's one you should look out for. By section titles, let me explain what I mean. So this book is divided into 7 books, as I've kind of been referring to. So like the Book of Fog is the first one, the Book of Sand is the second. And then within each of those is like different chapters, but then in each chapter are different section names. So you might notice that you see the name Melivta a lot in section titles. So you know that's somebody that when he comes up, maybe you should put a quick note to yourself, like who that person is. Also, I think that in addition to those people, I would say also the Shore family. So that is Elijah Shore and his relatives. I would say that you, like, pay special attention to them, maybe make a family tree if you want. The way that they are introduced at the beginning or close to the beginning is very much like, he has this many children and this is who they are and this is what they're doing. So I don't think it's like super necessary to have their names, but that family does come up quite a bit and they're not like a super main part of the story like some other main characters are. So a lot of times it would be so long since I had last heard about them that I would forget like which person a specific mention of a person was later on down the road. So when you see that name come up, I would say like, pay special attention, maybe write it down if you feel so inclined, if you're one of those people. I feel like that's one of those people, like I want to be one of those people, but I'm not actually. So I figure I'll just give the advice to anybody that is that type of person. Lastly, I want to say that it is okay if you don't understand every part of this book. This is not a book where you will get completely lost if you are lost in a specific part. There are tons of storylines and themes and learning moments that it's unlikely that you would get all of them on a first read anyways. It's like an open world video game. You know, there's like the main storyline that you definitely have an idea of what's going on, and then there's also these like side things that like maybe you check out, maybe you don't. And even if there's parts where like maybe you skip the dialogue a little faster than you should have in the middle of the main story, like that's still okay. You'll still have an overall understanding of what's going on. I just don't want anybody to like get to a section and be scared because they're like, I don't know what's going on. Because really all you have to do is like make it to the next section title, which is always not that far away, and then kind of re-enter with an open mind again. You got this. I believe in you. Okay, so finally we've come to my little review section of this video, because I didn't want to make this whole thing and still not, you know, do a little review, still not tell you my thoughts of the book. I won't lie, like I struggled with this book, but I didn't struggle as much as I thought I would. I typically am a person that really just avoids historical fiction like the plague unless it's on a book or long list. It scares me. And I've been starting to understand like over the past 6 months or so that it doesn't have to be that scary. But then this guy came along and I was like, ooh, that's terrifying. However, it ended up being like a very rewarding experience reading this book, because I got to see that like I can do this. Like I can read this and understand what is going on enough to say that like I get the story. Obviously, there are some parts that I'm sure that I didn't understand as well as I could have, especially not having any background in like the moment in what's going on. But I still got so much out of this. I ended up learning so much for this being like a novel, and I'm really, really pleased that I did end up reading this. It's kind of like when you've got a fantasy book that's got like this in-depth world building, and it's intimidating to get into because you're literally learning about a world for the first time. But then you get like halfway through the story and you're starting to feel like, oh, I kind of get it now. Like I feel comfortable in this world and like I understand what's going on and the reasoning behind different things. Like you've got all that world building background. This was kind of like that, except the world building was just like a period of time I knew nothing about and a place I knew nothing about. As for Jacob himself, did I like him? No, absolutely not. But I don't think you're meant to at any point. I think you're meant to understand how his followers perceive him, how people that don't follow him perceive him. Like Tokarczuk keeps you at a distance from Jacob, even though the whole book is about him and about how people feel about him. But you only really get like all of these perspectives looking at the same person. And it's really interesting to kind of understand him through other people, understand why people are drawn to him and why he seems like he could be this messiah and why others are really turned off by him and really annoyed by him. Like me, I was very annoyed by him. But I think that that is like, that's part of the point. And you get to understand like why they're at this moment culturally where it is so necessary for them to believe that the Messiah has come, because that's really like their only hope in this world that is not giving them opportunities to change their life, to improve their life in any way, that they either need to accept how things are or believe in this Messiah that has come to save them. In the end, this was a great book. Did I have a tough time? Do I wish it was shorter? Yes, I do. That's just my honest feedback. It feels really weird to be like, I know you put all this time into this book, but could you have made it shorter? However, I personally believe that a lot of the same things could have been achieved in a slightly shorter book. I'm not saying like a short book. I'm just saying like a not this long book, like not 1,000 pages, you know? But I still feel like overall, this was a definite net positive for me personally. Which brings me to the Booker Frog. Yes, you can go ahead and welcome him back. He's here for another Booker season. If you don't know, the Booker Frog is basically my way of saying, do I recommend a book or not? So if he ribbits, he recommends the book. There's also the elusive double ribbit, which only one book has gotten. I don't know. This only started last Booker. So like, but, and then if he doesn't ribbit, he like doesn't recommend the book. So this book is going to get a big ribbit from the two of us. I do recommend reading this book. I understand if you don't want to, like if you don't want to take on this story, I get it. It's a lot. It's a lot to take on, but making the decision of whether or not I'd recommend this book really came down to like, is my appreciation for having read this book equal to or greater than the amount of time that I spent on it? And I would say that it is. It's greater than. I feel like the time that I spent reading this book, the hours that I spent reading this book, was time well spent. And so that's why I would say that I do recommend it. Plus, it just filled in a period of time that I knew nothing about with, obviously, like this is still a novel, but it's based on real things that happened, and reading this book led me to looking into those things. So I got this like spark, this curiosity for a period of time that I didn't know anything about before this. And I feel like I don't often get this curiosity about something that happened in the past, which is probably why I typically stay away from historical fiction. But this book gave me that. And I loved it and I want more of it. So I'm really appreciative to it. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it maybe helped you out at least a little bit. If you've read or are reading the books of Jacob right now, let me know what you're thinking of it in the comments. Or if you're planning on reading it soon, then also let me know. And maybe you'll even find a buddy read out of it from the other commenters that are there. If you're seeing other people that are just about to start the book, you never know, it could happen. Anyways, usually I would say see you Wednesday, but probably before then again, because it's Booker season. We got a lot of content to get through. We've got a lot of books to talk about. So I guess instead, I'll see you soon. Subscribe for more Booker content. Bye.